everyone, Karen Weaver here. What a week it's been. In the middle of a pandemic, the city of Minneapolis is undergoing a traumatic scene of protests and violence all over the unfortunate death and passing of George Floyd at the hands of a Minneapolis police officer. It has created a lot of tension, not only in Minneapolis and the other twin city, St. Paul, but also in cities around the country. And this week, I was fortunate enough to interview Michael Shue, who is a regent at the University of Minnesota and a longtime Minnesota native. We started off the conversation talking about what this means to Minneapolis and also what this means to the University of Minnesota, as earlier this week, University President Joan Gable put out a letter to everybody in the university community indicating that the university, which is housed in Minneapolis, is cutting all ties with the Minneapolis Police Department, a wholly unusual decision. So I talked with Michael about that and also about his role on the board. I think you'll find the conversation interesting, and everybody, please stay safe out there. Hi, everyone, and welcome to the podcast. I'm Karen Weaver. Today, we're so fortunate to have a guest who's going to bring us a couple different perspectives on oversight and fiduciary responsibilities for intercollegiate athletics on a Big Ten campus. Michael Shue is a 1988 graduate of the University of Minnesota with a bachelor's degree in electrical engineering. He is currently the president of T-Master Corporation, which he co-founded, and he also attended the University of Chicago's Booth Graduate School of Business. Michael has been a trustee since 2015 at the University of Minnesota, and his term ends in 2021. Do I have that right, Michael?
That is correct.
Okay. And so my first question to you is, you're in Minneapolis, and we are in the middle of one of the most difficult public reactions to the killing of an African-American man on the streets of Minneapolis, not far from the campus. How are you doing?
Well, I'm doing fine. I don't live that close to where all this occurred and near campus, and I am concerned about it. The third precinct is, it's several miles from campus, and it's not actually the precinct that helps us patrol the area around campus. That's the second precinct. So in terms of, what's going on here, I think it's tragic. I think it's one of those things where, the city of Minneapolis, or actually the not just Minneapolis, because the Philando Castile situation occurred actually across the street from our St. Paul campus. But it was a small, St. Anthony was the police department that was involved in that one. So it's not just the city of Minneapolis, but in last night's events, in the rioting and protesting, the city of St. Paul was actually treated very poorly. And, the governor has called out the National Guard. I'm actually probably about 10 minutes north of where the closest events occurred around where I live. And that's in a shopping center called Northtown Mall in Blaine. And there's a Tub Foods there, I think, that, had some problems and maybe some looting, but, I haven't been there, so I don't know exactly what happened. I did see the news where one of the news stations was there covering it last night. So I was up pretty late last night watching it on TV.
Yeah, no, it's very distressing. And as I shared with you, I worked at the University of Minnesota back in the early 2000s. It only lived about 15 blocks from where most of this is happening. So it's very distressing to me as well. President Joan Gable sent out a very interesting and I would think somewhat unexpected letter to the whole Golden Gopher community just yesterday, I think. And that letter basically said that the university was cutting ties with the Minneapolis police force. Can you give us your response as a trustee to that?
Well, I really don't know anything about it. I was given a heads up. It all started with a letter from the president of our student association, undergraduate student association. I think it was a couple days ago, actually. And her response, Joan Gable's response was basically that we're going to not use Minneapolis police to handle any of our big events. And as a trustee or as someone who provides oversight for the university, first of all, right now we don't have any big events coming up. We don't, maybe we'll have football in the fall, and basketball and hockey and those types of things. Those are the biggest events that we typically have on campus. I'm not sure how we're going to handle things without them, but we also have another big city, St. Paul, which is just a little bit to the east of us, that has a lot of officers that can provide support. But this is mostly, I think a lot of people misunderstood what she said in the actual announcement. I think there are definitely places where we have to work together because we are in the city of Minneapolis, and as I said, we're in the second precinct, and most of the things that happen to students who live off of our campus are in the second district. So, whether or not there's crime or those types of things that are typically handled by the second precinct of the Minneapolis Police Department, those will continue to happen. It's just, I think bomb sniffing dogs and, other types of manpower that they need. And, the cameras and stuff I think are useful that they provide, but I'm not sure exactly what these agreements hold. Obviously, I've asked questions about, how this decision was reached, and actually asked for the contracts themselves because I don't know anything specific about them.
Yeah. Well, it's good for you to be involved and to ask the questions. And I'd like to transition into the original reason we were going to have the conversation, and also to start right up front and say you are speaking on behalf of yourself and you're not speaking on behalf of the Regents.
Yes.
And I think it's important for our listeners to understand that. So you joined the board back in 2015. What motivated you to join and become a Regent at the university?
Well, as an alum of the university, back in the 80s, I was aware of what the Regents did and all that kind of stuff. Most people are not aware of what goes on at the Board of Regents level, but we had quite a few scandals at the time as I was leaving the university, and the Board of Regents was really prominently involved in a lot of these activities going on, mostly involving money. Since then, we've had a lot of problems in athletics. And actually, we had problems earlier than that in athletics. In fact, we sued the NCAA at one time and sued the Big Ten Conference at one time for various things. So, I was aware of kind of what a Regent was back in the early days of my student experience. And then, having been engaged with the university on numerous levels, primarily involving Greek life as an alum, I was kind of aware of what was going on at the university. And, there happened to be an opportunity where the Regent that had, I'm in the 6th district, which is one of the 8 districts that are congressional districts that we have, and then we have 4 more Regents at large. So it just so happened that I live in the 6th district, and the 6th district Regent had served 12 years and was not running again, so it was an open seat effectively. And I decided to check it out, try it out, and I got elected the first time, fortunately or unfortunately.
What have you found most surprising about being a Regent?
Well, you said a little bit about my background, but having worked as a management consultant for a number of years and worked in business after that, started some companies, I just looked at it as kind of one of these things where you go and you find out what the problems are, you get some information, do some analysis and, figure out how to fix the problem. And unfortunately, it's not that way at all. There's a lot of politics involved. There are a lot of cultural things that, well, we always do things this way. This is how we do things. This is what our peers are doing. And I guess the most shocking thing is the fact that the University of Minnesota tends to look around at our peers, and we're followers. We're not leaders here. And that's one of the things I've tried to change. I don't agree with kind of the status quo of a lot of the rationales given for things that are happening here, in athletics and outside of athletics. So I've been a little bit frustrated, but I've also tried to change things, and I've been successful at some levels. So it's been good from that perspective.
Yeah, I think that's a really interesting observation, because the Big Ten is sort of perceived as this monolithic conference, but inside of it, there are a lot of institutional differences, and there are institutions that carry more sway than others, even though there's supposed to be a level playing field between 14 different institutions.
Yes, well, 14, now it's 14, and it was 10, and we have the fortunate status of being one of the founders of it, or one of the first members, and financially that's benefited us a great deal. In terms of athletics, I think the biggest surprise to me is how much money there is involved in it. I mean, from an institutional perspective, it's only about 2.5–3% of our budget. So it's not huge from that perspective, but it does get a lot of attention. We have, we're always mentioned in any local news broadcast. There's always time reserved for the university in terms of sports, and what we're doing, whether we're doing well or not. So there's always a lot of attention around athletics, as you know. And the interesting thing about it is, a couple of athletic directors ago, let's go back to 2012. Our budget was about $80 million. Now our budget is about $125 million in just 8 years. And the problem with that is we tend to always spend whatever money we have. We don't have reserves for athletics typically. One of the things that I was successful in putting in place was the board approval of athletic contracts. And we used to have this back until like the early 1990s. And then we had a president who decided that he wanted to ask the board to not approve coaches' contracts. And the board chair at the time in the discussion said, well, these are getting to be pretty big contracts. Are you serious that you don't think we should, approve the biggest ones? And he said, oh, for sure, I would bring those to you. So later on, it got approved, and there are actually some backstops there where if a contract is over a certain amount, it has to be approved by the board. And this is any contract that we have, not just athletic contracts. But when I joined the board, there were a number of contracts that came to us, and we found out that very quickly that we weren't approving them. They were just kind of there, and we were told that they were signed, and that was it. And I looked at them and I said, well, wait a second, these are over a certain amount. Why aren't we approving them? And of course they said, well, they're not on the list. And I said, right, they're not on the list. And so I did some research, and the funny thing is if you go back to the president, who it was Niels Hasselmo, who actually asked for that change in the policy, he actually brought no contracts to us after the fact, after it was changed. And so we actually approved no contracts, no coaches' contracts from like 1996 or 97 up until like 2017 or 2018. And so what happened is I actually brought a resolution to approve contracts, and I actually said any agreement with, which include doctors and anybody making above a certain amount of money. And of course, people went crazy and they said, well, we can't do that. And it took us roughly 2 years. And I think we finally approved an agreement or a policy change that would allow us to approve contracts over a certain dollar threshold. And during that time, the president at the time did bring those to us for approval. But the funny thing is their approval after the fact.
Yeah.
So what happens now is there's some verbiage in the contract that gets signed. So you hire a coach, you sign a contract, and it says subject to Regent approval. Of course, they're already on the ground working by the time we get a chance to approve it. So it's kind of, we do have approval, although no one has really said, well, what happens if we actually don't approve the contract after the coach has been here working for 2 months?
Yeah.
Now, we could take care of that by having an emergency approval, but nobody wants to have an emergency approval of a coach's contract. So I mean, there's all these politics around what to do in terms of coaches' contracts.
Yeah, and I think it's interesting because, again, trustees and regents are charged with being the fiduciaries, which means you're supposed to hold the institution, protect as much as possible in terms of legal and risk management, financial, help make decisions that'll be complex and complicated so that you can provide solid advice for the president of the institution. So in one of the most visible arms of the institution, it feels a little bit like you're being sidelined. Am I accurate in that?
Oh yes, the culture when I came on was you're basically not involved in any athletics decisions. And that is the cultural thing. That's the way it has been. But, I look at that and I say, well, maybe there's a reason why we haven't won a national championship in football since 1960. It's going on 60 years this year. So I think there has been, and every institution typically goes through something like this where you end up with a president who really isn't interested in athletics. Right. And so then athletics doesn't get any of the things that it needs for a certain period of time. Well, the University of Minnesota had not done well in football for, we won a Big Ten championship. It was actually a tie, a three-way tie, I think, in 1967. So that was, after I joined the board, it was approaching 50 years, which I think is way too long.
Yeah.
And so I've been very supportive of athletics. We approved the new Athletes Village shortly after I came on the board. And that was, that's about $190 million effort, primarily for football, a new football indoor facility, basketball facilities for men's and women's. And that freed up some other space for all the other sports. So it's a big investment, but it's supposed to be 100% donor funded. So when you have a situation like that and you have people who are just, they have a thirst for, being successful in athletics. And, we have a lot of alums who have waited a long time for success in sports. Now we've had some national championships. We've had, a hockey national championship. It's going on, almost 20 years for that. But we also have another campus in Duluth, UMD, and we have won 2 national championships back to back in hockey. So it's a very interesting kind of dynamic. But basically, the Regents have been closed out of any discussions. And when I joined the board, I said, why don't we have a committee for athletics? And I was basically told that, that culturally the president isn't very supportive of that, and the university hasn't had one for a long time. So, and when you were here, we had you were here before we merged the men's and women's departments.
No,
right?
I was there actually with the merger. I overlapped it. Yeah, I was 2 years in the women's and then 2 years in the men's.
Right. So you started here before the merger, and then.
Correct. Yes.
Okay, that's what I thought.
Yeah. So, Michael, one of the things you did recently was you made a resolution that was interesting, and you said that you would not permit the NCAA to interfere with athletes getting, quote, financial support from any source to cover food, shelter, medical and insurance costs until the COVID-19 crisis ends. What prompted you bringing that forward, and what has been the reaction?
Well, what the thing that prompted me is the fact that athletes are not being treated the same as any other student. And I use the example of someone needing food or even toilet paper and not being able to get it from somebody because of the limitations on benefits from the NCAA. So I just all I did was ask for, I called for the Board of Regents. We are members of the NCAA, although we're not treated as members because the NCAA wants the presidents to speak for the institutions. But when the presidents don't even talk to the regents about what's going on in athletics, it's kind of hard for us to have any oversight, right? So all I did was ask for the board to call for the NCAA to allow these things to happen until the COVID-19 pandemic is subsided. So I think that's a reasonable thing. We should be treating college athletes the same as we treat other college students. And in this case, if someone is unable to get enough resources, basic resources, I think they should be able to get it without crossing some line that the NCAA has created and potentially harming their eligibility.
Where is that resolution today?
Well, so the way the resolution, so I brought a resolution in our meeting under new business, and our general counsel, who has a responsibility for compliance, wrote us a memo. Actually, someone in his department in compliance wrote a memo to us. And it's interesting because the memo, actually, if you read it, the way I read it, the NCAA in March had already kind of given the schools the ability to not follow some of these rules. And the way I read it is that we should be taking advantage of this to give our students the ability to go out and get some of these benefits from other people. Now, what we've done is we've been giving them the support, financial support in some cases, flying them home if they need to go home. If they couldn't afford it, we had the assistance fund that allows them to use it for that purpose. Feeding them. I'm not sure how it works. I've asked questions on, well, what exactly are we doing? How many students are we talking about? Why aren't we doing more for them? And right now, that all I have is the memo, and I've requested answers to questions regarding the memo. But basically, I see what the NCAA, I wish I had it in front of me. I probably do somewhere here. But if, actually, I do have it here. So let me just read this if I could.
Sure.
One of the things quoted in this memo, it says, and this is from a statement on March 12th, 2020. It says, NCAA Academic and Membership Affairs, AMA, has received numerous questions regarding the implication of actions conferences and institutions have taken or might take in response to COVID-19. These questions have related to a wide range of regulations, including eligibility, membership requirements, and student-athlete benefits. Most importantly, conferences and institutions are encouraged to make decisions and take action in the best interest of their student-athletes and communities. Conferences and institutions should not be concerned about the application of NCAA legislation when decisions are being made in response to COVID-19. So I look at that and I say, well, yeah, maybe they've really already done what I'm asking for, but I don't know that anybody at our university has interpreted it that way and has communicated to the students that it's okay for you to receive food and toilet paper maybe from a neighbor. or a donor or someone else other than the university. And this memo goes on to say that the university has helped a lot of our athletes out, but I'm looking for detail on that, and I'm looking for whether or not my resolution is actually necessary. I may change the resolution to actually take advantage of that text and actually explain to the athletes what other benefits they're able to receive from other people.
Yeah, it sort of seems incredible that we're actually having these discussions when we know that there are athletes out there that whose families are in real financial trouble due to losing their jobs because of the pandemic, losing their health insurance because of the pandemic. And so to be able to step up seems like the least you should be able to do.
Right. And then the other part of it is, I don't know if you realize this, but everybody's trying to make football happen this year.
Yeah, I do.
And there's a reason for that, and it's money. And it's billions. In fact, some news outlet did a analysis, and they found that it may be up to $4 billion a year of value to athletic departments. Well, the thing is people, and these are things that I've learned since I've become a regent, but most people probably already knew them or know them now, which is football, basketball, and to some extent hockey pays for everything else. The University of Minnesota has 25 sports. We have the 8th biggest budget in our conference, but we have the 4th largest number, or we're 4th in terms of number of sports. Okay. The other thing I've learned that most people don't realize is that athletics is not completely self-funding. Right. At the University of Minnesota, we have $7 million of allocation that we get from the state. So the state gives us a pot of money and we allocate it. We give $7 million to athletics. Now, originally, that was like, there was $3 million given to us from the state when you were here to support women's athletics.
That's right.
And Title IX. Well, so what they've done is they've continued, the administration has continued to give that money, and they've, it's increased by, more than 100% over that period of time since the 70s or 80s, and basically decided to up that to $7 million. Well, so that is $7 million of support, which comes from the state, but it's resources that is really state funded. We also have, this is something that it took me several times. I had to ask this question in order to get an answer. So in a finance committee meeting, I said, what are the actual resources we're spending on athletics? And I asked the question once, and the CFO for athletics answered the question, didn't answer my question really, didn't give me a number. So I was really looking for a number. I asked him again, I'm looking for a number. He didn't give me a number. The third time, so I had to ask the question 3 times in a row. Third time, the CFO of the university jumped in, and he said, well, if we look at the athletics budget, there are things in it that are not included, not charged to athletics, but actually spent for the benefit of athletics. And I said, what's that? And it came out to be primarily related to debt service that is paid for by the university out of the general fund for the stadium, the new TCF football stadium, which I think the total amount was about $17 million a year of debt service. So you have to add that to any number that athletics comes and talks about in terms of our budget. So at that time, it was about a $108 million budget. So it's 125 now. But at the time, when you add 17 million to 108 million, you get 125. So right now, I don't know what the debt service is, but you could say if it's around 15, 17 million, and it could actually be more than that. Although I think the Athletes Village, we actually are charging the debt service to athletics. But if you look at that number, the number grows a little bit. And I think other schools have also taken advantage of that. So any number that you see that's provided by the NCAA, whether it's in the Knight Commission database or whatever, I think is underreporting, because I know the University of Minnesota underreports.
I know that for a fact, having been in charge of finances when I was there, and I have tried to explain that fact to a number of economists and others that they don't think that the NCAA can exclude those things, and I'm like, but the universities do, and that's the way they subsidize it. Michael, we're going to need to kind of wind this down a little bit, but the pressing question that I would like you to answer for our listeners, if you could, is what do you know now about being a regent that you wish you'd known when you first jumped on board in 2015?
Well, I always knew change was hard, right? But it's super hard in higher ed. Higher ed has this ability to shoot down anybody's ideas for change by saying that, well, none of our peers are doing it. And it really is hard to believe that that type of mentality exists in our institutions of higher learning, that people are just unwilling to change because no one else is. Now, a number of things are changing, inside and outside of athletics. It only took a pandemic, though, for a lot of these things, right? For the University of California to say that they're doing away with standardized testing, there's a lot around that. But I've been on the board for 5 years, and I've been saying we should go test optional, because the testing or standardized testing tends to discriminate against lower income people, and we already are making exceptions for a large number of people. So why don't we just say, look, we're gonna look at all the other aspects of your record and your achievements outside of school, and we're going to decide whether or not you belong here at the University of Minnesota. And I was told, no, we're not doing that. In fact, I don't want to make this long, but I had a long discussion with an Ohio State trustee at a dinner one year, and explaining this to her. And she said, that sounds great. Why don't you guys do it? I said, we don't do it because you don't do it. And she said, oh. And she understood right away what I was talking about.
Exactly right.
So, the pandemic has made standardized testing very difficult, if not impossible. So I think we are going to have to make that change. But that's just one thing where, it's just things are a lot harder at institutions of higher learning in terms of change than I would have ever expected.
Well, I think we'll leave it there for today. Michael, thank you so much for spending some time with us talking about the very real issues that many regents and trustees are facing today with the way the space of higher ed is being disrupted, and then how do we go about affecting change. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you for having me. I hope we can do this again. There are a lot of other points to cover, and we'll see what happens as we move forward in this pandemic.
Thanks, Michael. Once again, thanks for listening. I appreciate it, and I hope that you'll share some of these podcasts with your colleagues around the country. I think it's important to have a dialogue around college athletics at this very critical time in higher education's growth cycle. And I think there are more things that we ought to be discussing rather than just can we return to sports and can fans come to our games. These are really pivotal moments for college athletics and also for higher education, and they require deeper discussions and deeper debates. Please share. Thanks for listening.